How you doing, guys? If you have been looking at pretty much any number of preparedness websites or YouTube channels, chances are you've seen some of those ads that say like 100 things you need to buy before a disaster, or things you should hoard, and all this stuff, like these items you supposedly need to run out and buy in the event of a disaster. And this is something that also shows up in a lot of movies and books dealing with the disaster type, apocalypse type situations. Is a situation where right before the disaster hits, you have a chance to go out and get as much stuff as possible that you can buy, and there's hordes of people buying stuff, and like, what would you get, or how would you get it, kind of thing. And luckily these types of scenarios are not that likely, to where you would have some sort of advance notice, but only enough time to grab as much as you can stuff into your car or whatever. And if you're preparing like you should be, you wouldn't really need to do that anyway. Even if you did have advance notice of a crisis, you'd be able to spend your time a lot more productively getting prepared for whatever it was, as opposed to going out and running out and buying things. But there are certain situations that are conceivably possible to where you would have some notice that something was going to happen, and you had time to go out and get some more stuff last minute. And so the question becomes, what should you get? And so I put together a list, not of specific things too much, but more about categories of what sorts of things you should be getting if you find yourself in this situation. How it's probably not likely, but it could happen, so I wanted to deal with it. If the situation arises that you have, maybe a couple hours tops to go out to the stores before some huge calamity happens. And what you should avoid, first of all, is the things that everyone else is going to be getting. Pretty much any non-perishable food items, canned goods, bottled water, generators, anything like that. Ammo, gas or propane, batteries, flashlights, lanterns, matches, any sort of things like that are the things that everyone's going to be getting because they don't have them. Now, there's no reason why we shouldn't have all this stuff already, because it's relatively cheap now, and it will store easily with the exception of a few of the items. But if we're rotating them out, like we've talked about before, then it's not an issue. You can have all the canned goods, you can have your fuel that you're rotating out, or your propane. You should have some batteries if you have stuff that needs batteries. So all that stuff, you should already be stocked pretty much as possible if you are interested in being prepared. So what would you get if this situation arises? So I broke it down into a couple of categories. You want to focus on things that are too expensive normally, like maybe you want to get it and you feel like you could use it, but you just don't have the money or can't afford to afford it, so to speak. Like you could go buy it, but you just really don't want to spend that kind of money right now, but you may be able to go buy it last minute. Or things that have a short shelf life, things that you want to keep on hand, but you don't really use them all that often. So if you kept buying it, they would just spoil, and then you'd have to go buy some more, then it would spoil, and so you'd have to, spend a lot of money to keep this stuff stocked up. And if it's something that you really need, you should find a way to make it happen. But if it's other things that would be useful but not necessarily critical, then these would be good things to buy last minute. And also, last thing would be things that are useful but just the other people would overlook, things that people are likely to not try and get in a last minute panic to buy stuff. So, what are some examples of things? For number one, things that are just too expensive normally, maybe you could have tools, certain pieces of equipment that you may need to use in a crisis situation, but you just don't want to spend the money now. Maybe like a set of walkie-talkies or other sorts of communications gear that you would like to have, aren't critical enough to make sure you buy them now, but could be really useful in a crisis situation. So if you have that couple hours notice, you may want to run out and try to snag them. Number two, things that have a short shelf life. Now that could be any number of things, from like cooking oil, different kinds of medicines and first aid products that just don't last that long, maybe like antibiotics if you have a source for that. Things that have a shelf life but you don't really use them all that often in everyday life, enough to rotate out. And different chemicals like bleach has a shelf life, different things like that you could just make a list of things that would be very useful, and you could run out and buy them last minute, and they're not going to be too expensive, they're going to be overlooked also, and they just don't have a long enough shelf life for you to stock up on them year round in the event that nothing's happening. Third category would be things that are likely to be overlooked by other people who aren't prepared, or last minute panic shoppers. So what kind of things would fall into that category? First aid supplies and other health related supplements, maybe vitamins or protein powders. While I would avoid trying to get any kind of food in a last minute rush like that, I don't think a lot of people are going to be running over and getting bottles of alcohol, like isopropyl alcohol, or big gauze dressings, or different types of cold medicines, or anti-parasite medicines, or antibiotic ointments, and anything first aid related is probably not going to be at the front of somebody's mind in a last minute panic like that. And that whole section of the store would be empty even in a panic situation like that. So if you have to go out, that would be one thing to look after. Another one would be animal food, pet products, stuff like that. Well, Walmart may be mobbed, or the local feed store may not have anybody in it. So you could go buy last minute, stock up on a couple 50-pound bags of chicken food, get more food for your dog, or supplies that you may need if it were to be a protracted crisis, something that could last a long time. You're probably not going to have too many people to contend with in stores like that, or even in sections of other stores just have pet food. Maybe if you have an aquaponics setup, you want to grab a big bunch of fish food if you don't think you have enough on hand, or more food for your dogs and cats if you really don't stock that much to begin with, because people just aren't probably going to be thinking of that right away. They'll probably get to it, but if you get there and you don't have to worry about canned food and water because you already have that stuff taken care of, then you can go grab this other stuff without having to contend with other people. And in an emergency, in an extreme emergency, different types of pet food could be eaten by people if it became absolutely necessary too. So that's another way to look at it. Different clothing items. Maybe you decide, like, okay, if this is going to last a long time, I'm going to need a bunch more pair of work gloves, or different winter clothing that you may not have enough of if you're not going to be using your heater and stuff like that, or different types of work clothing, different types of gear, headgear, sunglasses or goggles, whatever. Most of this stuff, because it can last forever, you should try and take care of this ahead of time. But if you can, or maybe it falls into the first category too, where it's just too expensive for you to justify buying in a normal everyday situation, you could grab that last minute, because people probably aren't going to be focused on that right away. Or gardening supplies. Same with the pet food stuff. Not a lot of people, if it's a crisis is creeping up on people right away, they see this imminent thing happening, they're going to be more worried about what they're going to be doing for food tomorrow. They're going to be buying the stuff like the food and the water, like we already mentioned, the ammo and the batteries and stuff like that. They're probably not going to be thinking about how they're going to be taking care of their garden in 6 months if it turns out to be a protracted crisis. So you could get different kinds of seeds if you needed them, or fertilizers, or small gardening tools, or pretty much anything related to gardening and homesteading is not going to be focused on by a lot of people who are out there panic buying last minute. So hopefully those categories will help you, and if this situation ever arises. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't think this is a very likely scenario, and even if it is, even if this situation does come up where you have some sort of advance notice of a crisis, we hopefully are all going to be prepared enough that we don't have to step out to the store for any reason and deal with the mobs. We can prepare our situation at home and just get all our stuff squared away, all the stuff that we should already have. But it's worth thinking about, at least, because it could come up. So those are some things that I would recommend that you should go get if you do have to venture out in a situation like this, to avoid all the other people and have a chance of actually getting something that's not going to be focused on by everyone else. So let me know what you guys think, if there's any other things that you would put in this category that would be good to grab last minute that aren't going to be focused on by the other people.